Hi, good morning, good afternoon. We'll just give it a couple more minutes to get started, let folks join in. Starting to see attendees join the event. How's everyone doing today? So just quick setup here for folks that are joining in. We have a Q&A session that's available to you from where you can ask questions of the panelists. And you can also comment or share your perspective on any of the topics being discussed. Here we go. We see RG put out our first comment here for everybody. Okay, starting to see folks join in. So let me go ahead and start off with quick introductions. My name is Aseem Chandra. I'm one of the two co-founders at Immersa, and we're a data automation platform company for RevOps teams. Our goal is to help companies and RevOps teams bring product usage data out to sales and customer success teams to drive revenue and growth. This is the first in a series of webinars that we are co-hosting with RevGenius, and I am really pleased to have some very esteemed guests join us today. The goal of this series is really to help better understand what the role of revenue operations is and how do we measure not just the metrics that are used to figure out how our businesses are operating and running, but also how does revenue operations measure itself. So we're going to cover both aspects of that in this particular session today. So let me kick it off first of all by introducing our guests. Let's start off with you, Briana. Briana joins us as CRO from CModel. Maybe take a moment to share a little bit about who CModel is and your role, specifically what it means to be the CRO of CModel.
Happy to. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Briana Yarborough. I am a co-founder and CRO of CModel, which is an on-demand analyst for busy executives. So we consider it executives of startups and medium enterprises that are interested in revenue planning and understanding their capacity needs, headcount. We're really trying to simplify a lot of those complexities that we have learned over our collective 35 years of experience in revenue operations to streamline that and make it a little bit different from the tools that exist in the revenue intelligence space today by not just summarizing the data that's in your CRM or ERP, but really giving you contextual insights on this is how you get from point A to point B. And so our brain power is, created this algorithm, and we're really excited to be here on the panel today.
Perfect. Thank you, Briana. And while we're introducing the panelists on the session today, if you are joining in as an attendee, feel free to join to share where you're dialed in from. So, for example, I'm usually in California, but today in Las Vegas here for the Snowflake event. So if you're an attendee listening in today, just drop a quick note and let everybody know where you're dialing in from. Okay, moving to our next guest. Let's go over to you, Matt Sinise from Mural. Go ahead, Matt.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, everybody. Excited to be here. I'm Matt. I'm on the RevOps team at Mural, and I've been there starting year 7. So wow, I have a support background, and then was lucky enough to transfer over to revenue operations. I'm in New Jersey right now. And a little bit all over, kind of split my time between New Jersey, New York area, and Spain and Argentina. So excited to talk today.
And Italy?
A little bit, not as much as I'd like. A little bit of Italy.
Okay, yeah. Got it. All of those places are awesome. So Matt, it doesn't suck to be Matt. Let's start there. All right, let's move on to Andy. Andy, third time you and I are on the same call or same panel this past month. Great to see you again. Please go ahead and introduce yourself and the company that you represent.
Yeah, Andy Mowat. I run RevOps at 3 Unicorns. I'm really passionate about the topic. Today, I'm actually CEO of a new company I founded about a year ago. We basically stop email from people you don't know from entering your inbox without them making a donation to reach you. Company's called Gated. I love the RevOps community and really excited for this panel.
Great. And Andy, maybe share a little bit more about your background in the RevOps space, because I know that you've obviously spent a bunch of time there, but the audience may not be familiar.
Yeah, I first got into it at Elance/Upwork when the CEO said figure out marketing ops. So I figured that out and sent a blast to 700,000 IT professionals, got us put in spam. And then I built out their entire RevOps and sales infrastructure. I then went to a startup that I did Box, where I ran all post-sale ops. And then I also took on marketing ops through a migration to from Eloqua to Marketo, which was a lot of fun. And then the last 4 years, we're at Culture Amp, where I ran all RevOps and demand gen, focused on, we took that company from 4 million to 80 million in revenue in 4 years. So I love kind of figuring something out once it's got product market fit and then driving rapid scale off of it.
Very cool. Very cool. Thank you, Andy. Great to see the engagement here from the audience. Couple of familiar names. Quick shout out here to Mohit. Good to have you on the call. Let's continue. So for the audience, if you don't mind sharing your role at whatever company you work with today, that would be awesome. Just your role and the company name. Just an opportunity for everybody to get to know each other a little bit. And then from a panelist standpoint, we're going to dive into some of the questions. I want to warn both the panelists as well as give a little bit of a heads up to the audience. We're going to have a very interesting Q&A session, rapid fire Q&A session towards the end of this event, where we'll have the panelists reveal certain personal and professional information that they may not have shared in the past. So you guys might want to start thinking about that. And then if there's any questions that the audience would like us to ask, please let me know. But we want to make it as fun and interesting as possible for all of us. Okay, so let's dive into the meat of this. So first, I'd love to hear a little bit about from each of you. You've all been in RevOps roles, are currently in a RevOps role. Help us define revenue operations. Does it simply mean that you're able to go across sales, marketing, customer success, and some of the other revenue producing functions inside the organization and help them organize their ops? Like, what does that really mean? So the term is relatively new. It's something that the industry is still wrapping their heads around, and would love to get each of your perspectives. So Andy, I see you nodding. Why don't we have you kick it off, and then we'll go to Matt and Briana.
Sure. What is RevOps? RevOps is a sexier name for what sales ops, I think, but what I believe it's more go-to-market ops, which encompasses sales ops, marketing ops, and CS ops. That to me is GTM ops, but I've given up fighting that battle, so we call it RevOps. I think RevOps is both tactical with the systems and the processes to execute, but they also need to be strategic with the data. And I see a lot of RevOps teams that are only the former and not the latter.
Fair enough. Great point. Matt, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think we could stop there. No, I agree. That was beautifully said. I think our just to add on to that, I think the goal of revenue operations is to constantly improve the customer journey, right, across the board. So it's easy to lose sight of that, particularly when you come from, to your point, Andy, a lot of times it goes from a sales ops to RevOps. A lot of times that gets lost in silos of different teams and focusing on only revenue. I think the end goal of revenue operations is really to eventually help customers and help them have a better, easier experience.
Great. Briana, you were about to say something. Go ahead.
No, I just joked in the beginning. I was laughing at that, but I completely agree with both of them. It's the end-to-end process that supports the customer life cycle, the customer journey, right? You need to have KPIs and infrastructure, processes, and strategy that aligns with that from an organizational perspective. So there's an umbrella where you have OKRs and strategic objectives, priorities for the organization as designated by your investors, your board, your C-suite. right? That then funnel down into how we operate and how we address certain things within the organization as it relates to stakeholder engagement, our tooling, our data infrastructure, the data points we're capturing. It's all about observability, visibility into insights that help you pivot and strategize and create processes and documentation that supports, the upward trend into the right direction for the organization. And so interconnected systems, data and functions, and by functions, I mean departments that will progress the company forward.
That's really cool, Briana, what you just covered there. I think, one of the things, we've interviewed a number of folks from the RevOps domain over the past year and a half, as we've looked into how do we build out a product that supports people that operate in that function. And, it's interesting that sometimes we hear the inside out view of revenue operations as, I used to be doing sales ops, and now, I've moved into a RevOps role. That's a very common path that we see for folks that sort of move into that role. Very different from the view that all three of you are espousing here, which is to kind of take the customer journey view, which is the outside in view, and then figure out what's the strategy, what's the process, what are the KPIs, and therefore what's the data and systems that support it. So I think for the folks that are moving from sales ops or one of the ops functions that are somewhat siloed into a revenue ops role, what kind of advice would you have for them? What's the best advice you can offer them?
I'd say it's a question of whether they're retitling their role or whether they're actually changing their role. I think a lot of people in sales ops retitle it. Like, I'd say generally what I've seen is you have a person or a group that's trying to bring cohesiveness, but I think it's hard to do all three functions deeply at once, right? And so I think ideally, and I've always seen it as like, you're going to have people that are focused on sales systems, you're going to have people that are focused on marketing systems. I truly believe that all of those people ideally roll up to one group so that they're thinking cross-functionally. And the implications, not just for if you're in sales ops of the sales team, but also how does that work with marketing? And so I guess I would say it's really org structure driven, right? Like if you happen to be in a sales ops function rolling up to sales, you're going to be thinking like that. If you happen to be in a RevOps function rolling up to a multifunctional RevOps leader, you should think more cross-functionally and more coordination would be what I would say. So I guess there is a cynical side of me that there are definitely a lot of people that are just sales ops with a RevOps title. Those people, I think broader and think bigger. I would hope as well too.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with that, Andy. I've seen a lot of that now. I look at job descriptions, and I've had through my feed people kind of calling out companies like, this is not a sales ops role, this is a revenue operations role. And a lot of companies, especially outside of SaaS, don't truly understand the difference, right? They just want you to help them generate revenue in a predictable way. The advice that I would give to someone that is truly moving from a sales operations focused siloed position into a revenue operations position where they have to think about the business in a more holistic sense is that your stakeholder engagement is key. Your revenue engine and your customer life cycle, that journey is key. And understanding all of the key points of performance-based metrics at each stage of that life cycle is going to be very critical for you. You've only owned one piece of that puzzle. I also do not, I completely understand that, companies are strapped for resources, and I have been the one person team before owning all of RevOps as well as FP&A, business intelligence at the same time. And so I leveraged my resources in other departments, people that wanted stretched opportunities. They were probably doing something completely different. For example, at a VR company, I had an actor that wanted to learn more about sales operations, how we were doing revenue at our business, how we were integrating systems, data architectures, and I pulled them under my wing. I mentored them, and in return, I got some work done because I was able to allocate and give them projects. And so that's a little bit of my advice. One person teams versus moving from sales ops to RevOps.
Yeah, I think you covered a couple of really good points there, Briana, at least that I took away from what you just walked through. I think first, of course, the stakeholder management is critical, and then the second, this idea that you may be a one-person team, but if you're looking at revenue operations across, that's a very different role than sales ops function. So let's kind of double click on that a little bit. So this idea of stakeholder management, often, and particularly in SaaS companies, a lot of the focus and emphasis in startups and early stage companies is to acquire new customers. So by definition, the sales organization yields or has a far greater influence on the priorities of any team that's supporting them. And so from a operations perspective, how do you balance out the priorities between sales and customer success and marketing? And in your case, you mentioned FP&A as well, which is pretty unique to have that responsibility in addition to supporting the revenue, the customer facing part of the revenue journey. So help us understand a little bit obviously you can't go at it function by function. So what would be a different approach?
Yeah, so my approach was a roadmap. I started with establishing all of the priorities across all of the departments that we needed to attack as it related back to our new Series B investment as an organization and where we were targeting for our revenue growth to be in the next year. And those priorities had a cross-functional working group that was assigned to it. And we met every single week. We evaluated them, we prioritized them, we updated each other on progress on those activities. And, I think leveraging people that are not just your leaders that you need to report up to and provide forecasting detail or talk about pipeline or quotas or compensation or anything like that. It is the working groups beneath them that help you progress work forward based off of the organizational's KPIs, OKRs, organizational objectives, things of that nature, which then inform you of all of the things that you need to do to get the company progressing and moving forward. One priority might look like, we went from Insightly at the time to a new CRM that just so happened to be HubSpot. COVID just happened. That was one of the priorities. We specified who owned that priority. We needed to find out how do we get the finance data and the sales data aligned. We are going through a second-year audit, which those are not fun. The first year they're nice. The second year they're like, you got a whip coming at you. But in addition to that, you also going through a Series B fundraise where you have to produce due diligence. And so as we are assembling our reporting, you really see how misaligned the organization, how siloed the organization is. And so bringing them all together to have a deep conversation, a workshop about all of the priorities we need to do, assigning them, prioritizing them, giving them deadlines, and then coming together on a regular basis to make sure that they're progressing in the right direction. That includes the KPI development, the metrics, and paying attention to all of those things. And so without having a departmental or functional team underneath me in revenue operations, created my own with cross-functional work groups.
Got it. Very cool. Go ahead, Matt. Let's
go ahead, Matt.
Let's come to you and then over to Andy. I think I hear you wanting to say something around your current function and your current role, because you're probably dealing with this reality every day. And then
Absolutely.
Andy, I think your perspective as the founder CEO of Cadence, like I'd love to sort of hear it from that lens. What does that look like for you?
Love it. Yeah, I love both the points that you guys made on the last question as well. And to Andy's point around, titles, I think that goes for organization and structure as well, right? So
yeah,
in some cases, I've seen cases where RevOps has existed, but marketing ops has reported up to marketing, been a separate team, or CS ops might report it to CS. Then you might, so some of that might be forced on you. And I think that plays into this question around how do we organize, prioritize, and ensure alignment across those groups. And I think it goes back to the fundamentals of planning, right? Like having a good cadence where you're syncing with those teams and joint planning across those groups will ensure that you have tighter alignment and that you're focusing on the same initiatives. Because if you have one group working on, one item, top of the funnel, a tool, they actually need support from another group, but that group is working on something else, right? You're losing synergies there, and you might be you're probably causing inefficiencies across the board, right? So I think that goes back to the fundamentals of having a good cadence with each of those groups, really clear communication, and then joint planning on, OKRs or top initiatives that each of the groups are going to work on together across those functions.
Okay, great. Andy, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I've observed that a lot of stakeholders can't process like all the small stuff that RevOps is working on. And so I've generally found that like high level strategic clarity on these are the big rocks, these are how we're prioritizing them, and here's kind of like our strategic goals. And then beyond that, I don't think I haven't been able to see them like get in and be like, yes, so I care about this specific thing too much in detail. So I kind of look at it as RevOps is sharing out like one slide max. These are the big rocks. These are the strategies they're defining, and this is what we're working on them. If you want to know what else we're working on, you're welcome to see it in our Asana board or whatever it is. But I think that clarity is important.
Yeah, no, that's well said in terms of not just achieving stakeholder, stakeholder buy-in, but also reporting out to the exec level. I think that's an art that requires a lot of experience and active engagement to figure out what's the expectation at the C-level to receive information in what format. And oftentimes, a lot of folks that are entering into this function, not necessarily, I mean, they do a great job executing on it, but how they communicate that impact is something that's overlooked. And so good call out from both Andy and Matt on that front. So let's move into one of my favorite topics, which is metrics. And I have a little exercise for the audience here as well. So if you guys don't mind, just if you're in an operations role or in receiving metrics from your operations team, share with us on the chat pod, what are some of the, what's the top 1, 2, or 3 metrics that you care about, and share a little bit about, you've already shared your title or your role, but just maybe remind folks sales, I'm in sales and I care about XYZ, or I'm in RevOps and the top metrics that I usually communicate out are XYZ. And let's get that conversation going on chat. And then I'm going to have the same question or a similar question for the panelists. It's less about which metrics. I want to hear a little bit more about your process to come up with the metrics. So if you don't mind sharing your perspective on that, and in particular, how do you involve your stakeholders to come up with the right metric? So I'm going to ask Matt to kind of take the lead on this one, because I imagine that in your current role, you probably have recently gone through something like this, or are probably going to soon go through it again. So maybe take us through the process.
Awesome. Yeah. Love data, and it's a regular part of my day-to-day. It's a constant process, right? This is an iterative process. When you start maybe as a team of one, which Briana talked about, also went through that, you might be starting from scratch there, right? But I think the way that I think about data is you're answering questions, right? So what questions do you and the stakeholders, your leaders, your account executives, whoever you're supporting, what questions do they have about the customer, about their journey, about what's going on in the account, right? And then how can we answer those questions with data, right? So I like to start from that approach rather than saying, okay, here's our funnel and we need XYZ. Of course, there's going to be basic data, sales velocity metrics, for example, that we're always going to want to measure, probably in any business. And you'll have that, that base. But I think that goes back to thinking about the customer journey, thinking about how we're supporting the customers in each area. And then what are the key questions that we need to answer in order to improve that journey and ultimately generate value, which will lead to revenue, right? Revenue is definitely a lagging indicator. It's the last piece of the puzzle. So how can we identify each of those points where we can improve? How can we monitor that? And then from that, gather the insights we need to improve that journey. And one way that has worked, but took a bit of learning that we've done this is actually with surveys. So we've actually sent surveys specifically geared towards data to different stakeholders. The first time we did it, it was too vague and wasn't focused on questions, and we didn't really get what we wanted out of it. The more that we focus it on, okay, what are questions that you want to answer as a leader, right? What are questions you want to answer that you can't today, right? With data. That's where we got more insightful feedback from them in areas where, oh, I would love to be able to see X, Y, Z, or whatever that is, right? More insights into customer usage or more insights into product data, or whatever that is. And that's where we really, based off of that, could build out some initiatives and additional KPIs.
Got it. Briana, do you want to go next? I mean, obviously, I think if I understood it correctly, not only have you done this in the past, but you also help other companies go through this process. So tell us a little bit more about how you approach this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a fan of the bow tie. And, at each stage of the bow tie, you are informed about a particular piece of performance or velocity, conversion rates, volume, etc. And so pinpointing based on how the business model of that organization operates, there are a few different ways. You could have a subscription model, you could have a usage-based, you could have a combination of both, a one-time fee, and you have a lifetime value of this particular system. But based on those business models, these variables change. And so the process that I take in understanding what's important, I agree, Matt. It's about a story. You need to be able to tell a story, and that story should be of progression in the right direction. Obviously, you don't want to see churn or NDR, net dollar retention, reduce. You want to make sure that you are at the end of that bow tie. We focus so much on the front of the bow tie, so I'll focus on the back end of the bow tie. We see so much of that part of the bow tie, resulting in revenue leaks because we aren't onboarding properly. And, looking at those volume metrics and looking at those conversion rates will inform us on, okay, this is not as high as what we're supposed to be performing at from an industry benchmark perspective. Right? Benchmarks are also a part of the pie for me. And, NPS, CSATs, that will help inform whether or not our customers are satisfied. If we have very direct conversations with them, what can we do better? The surveys that Matt mentioned, all help in the retention portion of that policy, but it also helps with upsells, cross sells, and not just the renewals, right? And so in order to have a recurring revenue sort of model, and you get to that second start of the bow tie and you're really starting over, you want to continue to learn more and have a feedback loop about what's missing from our product that our customers need. You continue to do user research by just throwing in a little question here, a little question there as you're managing that account. And so I think for me, the process is look at the holistic view of the revenue engine through a bow tie. Awareness all the way to loyalty. People have different names for each of them. Look at the volume metrics, how many people go into each section, and then look at the conversion rate, how many go and move into the next section, the next stage, and continue to look at that on a trending basis. You want to look at it, I don't know, at least monthly, I would say. I probably overdo it. I do it twice a month. But at the same time, I also realize that there's so much more that we need to do as organizations. And so that would be my key takeaway and sort of my process that I think about. And the final piece was that benchmarking effort, making sure that you're understanding what good looks like, and trying to get yourself closer, closing that gap. If you're not ready for benchmarking, if your company's not big enough yet for that, all you're doing is making sure that your numbers are growing and moving in the right direction. When you get to a point where you can benchmark, do it. It'll help even more.
Great. Very cool. So Andy, I'll let you comment on the same topic, and then come back to a couple of comments that Briana and Matt made.
Yeah, no, building on what they said, and I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a big believer in weekly executive cadence for metrics. I think the predictability of that and people understanding like clear format, consistent, really structured, helps bring everyone in the right place. I'd say most of the metrics I tend to focus on are ones that are, cross-functional in nature and are aligning people at the executive level. And then you could break it down from there. So my favorite obviously is pipeline. I think it's where marketing and sales need to meet. I think retention is obviously critical, win rate. You can go a lot deeper, but I tend to try to keep that to like 15 to 20 slides, really high level. And then people have the ability to click in and deep dive however they want. Got it.
I think the cadence point that you just made, Andy, is a really important one. Often we find, there's an effort kicked off around measuring something, but then it tapers off as people stop focusing on that, or there isn't sufficient cadence on tracking it or acting upon it. So let me. I want to actually pick up on something that Briana said about benchmarking. I'm curious, for the audience, there's a question I'd like to put out there, which is, do you benchmark today? Yes, no. And if you do, what's the source of benchmarking data that you compare yourself to? If you could share that on the participant channel, that would be awesome. And I think for the panelists, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know, Briana, you've already covered this a little bit, but Andy and Matt, how much credence do you give to benchmarking? And at what stage of a company does it become relevant? Because Andy, I understand like Gated is an early stage startup, as are we. At what stage do you start to care about benchmarking yourself against a cohort, as opposed to sort of simply focusing on your internal metrics?
Yeah, I'll do culture amp, and then I can talk about Gated for a quick second. I think it's a valuable quick sanity check. I mean, at culture amp, when we were at the scale we were at, we had so much history. I think you want to make sure you're processing inbound in the right way, that your win rates are at a reasonable level, and that your like ramp times are good. But like, I don't put too much credence in like deep benchmarking. I generally would just pick up one of my RevOps colleagues, ask them a couple questions, make sure we're tracking well. For Gated, I think it's actually, at smaller companies, it actually is more important, because you need to be able to get those pulse checks early of like, where do you spend your time, right? So we picked up the phone, called OpenView, spent 4 or 5 hours with them. They've been incredibly helpful, and we know where we're good and we know where we need to focus on.
Got it. And for those who are not familiar with OpenView, they are OpenView Partners is a venture fund based out of Boston, and one of the early funds that identified PLG as a sales motion or as a trend in the industry, and have done phenomenal work in benchmarking product-led growth companies, and actually published some very good data on it. So do check it out if you are not familiar with them. Okay, so Matt, go ahead. Love to hear your thoughts on benchmarking. If you actually do that today, and if so, then what's the data source that you benchmark against?
Yes, yes, we do it, and I agree that I think benchmarking against yourself is probably more valuable than benchmarking against an industry, particularly if you're in a newer industry. It is a great sanity check. I do believe it's important to do, and to think about how you're allocating resources and headcount, for example, right? How are you generating pipeline? Where do you want to set those handoff moments, right? I think that helps inform you based on what's going on in the market. Briana posted a couple there that I love using. Science of Revenue, I really love. There's a number of different public reports, like state of reports for sales development, sales in general, customer success, that also are valuable to take a look at. So I'll generally take a look at those. I agree with Andy's approach in that I don't take too much stock in them, and particularly we'll check if the group that they're surveying or where they got the data is relevant to the use case that I'm using it for, right? For my company or our business model, right? If it's based on companies that use PLG and my company is a enterprise ABX sales model, it's not going to be that relevant, right? So I think you want to double check that, but I do think it's helpful to see, and I think you can identify areas where the business in general can improve based on those high level benchmarks.
Got it. Okay, awesome. All right, so let me shift gears a little bit, folks. So we've talked about how do we define RevOps, how is it different from supporting a function to supporting the entire customer journey from a go-to-market perspective. We talked about how do we think about metrics, how do we establish metrics, bring stakeholders into the conversation, how do we establish a cadence around it, how do we benchmark metrics. There's a lot of ground to cover. I want to shift gears. I want to talk about data and tools. And while we do that, one of the requests of the audience would be to think about what's the most challenging aspect of your role in terms of establishing metrics, right? So what's the one thing that gets you, that comes in your way of establishing metrics within your company? And obviously, whether it's data, whether it's process, if it's tools, if it's internal stakeholder alignment, just give us a little bit of a sense for what are some of the biggest challenges you as an audience face, and then the panelists will respond to some of those issues as they come up. But I'll open it up to anybody who wants to go first. But love to hear about the data and the tools side of things, as we've covered enough around the process side at this point. So who'd like to go first? Feel free.
I'm happy to riff on data and tools. So core data stack for GTM has historically been like Salesforce and a marketing automation platform. There are limitations to the insights and the actionability you can get within that. And so it's neat to see you're at a Snowflake conference this week. I think I've seen a lot of sophisticated organizations in RevOps start to have a data engineer, have a data warehouse, have a data modeling tool, and then a data visualization tool, and then ways to get it in and out. The systems there may vary depending upon what you need, but there's some fairly standard stuff that's starting to emerge in that side. So I think, I think in 3 to 5 years, every RevOps team will need data fluency, hopefully sooner. And I'm seeing that come. Matt's nodding, so I'm guessing he's got some pretty good stuff on his side too.
Yeah,
probably better than I can afford, but I'd love to hear about it.
So data fluency, great topic. Matt, what do you think?
Yes, I want to just double click on that. Yes, please. Data fluency is so important. Getting data resources is very tough still from a RevOps team. And I think that's when we talk about measuring the success of a team, I think one of the ways to really measure how well your RevOps team is working and the impact they're generating is availability of headcount and also the strategic piece, right? As you start to generate more insights, is the team being involved in those strategic conversations, right? Do you have a seat at that table? But we can get more into that later. Data-wise, I think one piece that is a challenge that constantly comes up when we talk about tooling and data is balancing automation with depth, right? And accuracy of data. So there's a lot of cases where you could automate different data points. Give you an example. Mural, for example, is a tool that is very flexible and can be used in many different parts of an organization. So team level data, right? Which teams are using it within an organization? You could ask account executives to fill that in, or the CS team to fill that in manually, or you could try to automate that. And behind each of those doors are very different challenges with data accuracy and the depth of that data, right? So I think when you are trying to measure something, you have to explore the pros and cons of both. And it really depends on the objective there, what you're trying to measure and what will work best. I think at least in my case, as an operator, I would generally try to automate more than rely on, human input. But there are cases where that's going to give you much more valuable information, and you probably need to rely on it. So, how do you balance that, and how do you make those decisions? I think ultimately, making good decisions there will lead to better data accuracy, and ultimately better decisions at the strategic level.
Yeah. And Matt, as you were taking us through your experience with data and how you see this evolving, I see a couple of really interesting comments here on the chat. So Mike Griffin, thanks for your comment. But the point he's making is the future of RevOps is definitely to move towards data models with SQL engineering chops. But they must report to a commercially fluent leader, because those folks are not groomed to care about stories that have underlying data. So I think this is a really good point. There's actually a couple of good points in that statement. One, we found that in our own experience interviewing and talking to a lot of RevOps people as we're building out Immersa, we're starting to see some teams hire data analysts onto their RevOps functions, and particularly the more mature ones are already starting to hire those skill sets, as opposed to depend on that skill set in an adjacent part of the organization. And then second, sales leaders, CROs, marketing leaders being data fluent to where they can ask the right questions of their RevOps teams and interpret the response based off of the data that they're getting from them, as opposed to simply storytelling, but even going a little bit deeper into the data, is starting to become really critical in many conversations that we're a part of. So any comments on that, Briana? I see you nodding on that. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think Mike's touched on a really important trend there that we're definitely seeing as we talk to a number of teams in the industry.
So just hearing the group speak, one, you stole my answers. So I'll focus on the comments over here that we have. The interesting thing about me is I headed FP&A, business intelligence, and RevOps at once. So as I'm thinking about the alignment across those three departments and building a revenue engine, I had to think about the data warehouse and the business intelligence tool, visualization tool that we nestled on top, so that we could have all of our data flowing from our, go-to-market team, from our finance team, and from our product usage standpoint, because we had a usage-based model, so that we could see the full picture of the organization. And this was back in 2020. And so it's been happening, and I think it will become more and more prevalent. I am a huge fan of dashboards. The problem is that tools that exist today are like Lydia just mentioned, siloing the data so that you can only see the dashboard for the data that lives in that tool. You have to have a data warehouse or a lake or something that ties everything together so you can see the full picture by hierarchy. One of the problems we ran into, or the problems that I had to think about while I was, fixing this challenge for the organization, was that one company could have multiple contracts. And so we needed unique identifiers to pinpoint which of those contracts belong where. And it flowed from our marketing to our CRM to our ERP, all of that into this data warehouse, with the product usage so that we could charge them that usage-based fee in addition to that license fee whenever they renewed. And so we had all of the information in one place, and it made it a lot easier. And the dashboarding also, in the process that I created, it triggered automations for emails to go out to customer experience team members when they were reaching the limits, so that we can start to have conversations about upgrades, or when we're reaching the time for renewal, so we can have those conversations, or when we have not received a payment on an invoice and it wasn't something that was automatically put together. So I literally had a holistic business structure that was streamlined, from no visibility into anything, invoices not getting paid because we're not tracking usage. I mean, the problems were endless, to a solution that helped streamline all of those events and triggered announcements or informs to help support things getting done.
Mm-hmm.
Get it done.
We can talk about, I can talk about dashboards endlessly. It's a good topic for a future conversation. So we're approaching the tail end of this webinar. I'm going to be respectful every time. So a couple things, folks. So if you're listening in and you'd like to connect with any of the other folks that are on the panel here today or are part of the audience, feel free to share your email, your LinkedIn, whatever else is the appropriate mechanism to connect with you besides RevGenius, of course, so that people can get a hold of you or reach out to you in any way. So I'll let everybody kind of take that and go through it. The second thing is we intend to create a series here that is relevant and useful to the audience. So I am going to share my email address here. And if you can send me a quick note and say, here's a topic I really care about, aseem@immersa.co. And we will incorporate that in future conversations, a topic, a question, anything that bugs you as far as what you're trying to figure out, anything you might be working on that you'd like to get an opinion from the team that's joined here. Okay, so while you're doing that, I'm going to shift gears a little bit here for our panelists. So I did promise that we're going to get the panelists to reveal a little bit more about themselves than they had bargained for when they signed up today. Usually, this is how I've done this in the past. We play a word game, folks. So panelists might want to pay attention to this. We play a word game. I've always done it one-on-one. So it's been the first time that we try to do this with 3 people at the same time. I am going to throw out something really simple. For example, what's your favorite color? And Matt might say blue, and Andy might say pink, and Briana might say black, which is what you're all wearing today. And you know, so it's really quick. Whatever's the first thing that comes to your mind. It only works if it's rapid fire. So you've got to keep your lines open. And just to make it work, we're going to go in terms of order. We're going to go Briana, Andy, and Matt. It's completely random. It's just where you are on my screen. So we'll try that and see how that goes. So you guys ready?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. All right, so I'm just going to start with favorite color. Briana, go.
Green.
Andy. Matt.
Blue.
Okay, favorite place, Briana.
New York.
Matt. Oh, sorry,
Barcelona.
Andy.
Sorry.
Oh,
Barcelona.
Fallen Leaf Lake.
Okay, all right. Top metric that you measure.
CAC.
Pipeline.
Net dollar retention.
Okay, and I think the next one you guys already answered, but I'll ask anyway. Revenue or retention? What do you care about more?
Retention.
Revenue.
Retention. Both.
Okay.
I know, right? You're making me choose the hard one here.
Matt, you can say both. That works. Okay, sales or customer success, Briana?
Customer success.
CS.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. This next one is a trick question, you guys. Your favorite CRM platform? Briana gets it.
Oh God. You let Matt say both. I'm going to say all.
Okay. All right. What do you think, Andy?
Data warehouse.
Okay, Matt.
Salesforce.
Salesforce. Okay. Integration. What's the first word that comes to mind when you hear the word integration? Briana.
Data visibility.
Okay.
Run as fast as you can from MuleSoft.
Matt.
Who approved this?
Okay.
Good one.
Now, next one, QBR. When you think about QBRs, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
KPI deck.
EBR. Nick Meta said, don't call them a QBR, call them an executive business review, and then all the executives show up.
Awesome. Matt.
Can we make this more efficient?
Okay, cool. And then the last question, who's your favorite RevOps influencer? Briana.
Rosalind Santa Elena. I just had a call with her the other day, and she is just a rock star.
Jordan Henderson.
Okay.
Well, I like them both. I was going to go with Rosalind too.
Gotcha.
There's so many good ones.
And again, no right or wrong answer. I think it's just a fun round to get a sense for who you are, what kind of problems you're thinking about. I appreciate your playing along and participating. I appreciate the attendees sticking it out with us to the end of the webinar. And, of course, we'd love to hear from you. So please ask us any questions that are top of mind for you. Send us a note afterwards, and we'll do another one of these in July, and then bring in other panelists as well as part of the conversation based on the topics that you raised to us as important to you. So thank you everybody for your time. Thank you Rev Genius for hosting us, and to the team at Immersa that worked behind the scenes to pull all this together. Karima and Lina, appreciate your help. Take care everybody. Panelists, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you everyone.